Hello, Dr. Burton here. We're going to talk today about Neo-Marxism, and the way this is going to work, we're going to view a video piece from MSNBC and interviewing a New York Times reporter. They're going to talk about a report that was prepared for the president about the events that took place prior to the revolution in Egypt in early spring of 2011. This report will be just a classic neo-Marxist analysis of the causes of these things, and we'll see that 2-minute video, and then we'll talk about neo-Marxism, and we'll talk about that report. And then we'll spend just a brief period of time talking about the differences between the underlying causes of something and then the specific triggers. All right.
The revolt in the Middle East comes as no surprise to President Obama. The White House says last year the president asked his advisors to come up with a secret report on the possibility for unrest in the region. That report showed if certain countries didn't make major changes, it was just a matter of time before the people erupted. Joining me to talk more about this is David Sanger. He's with the New York Times. David, good to see you today.
Good to see you, Contessa.
The president had asked for a report on the likelihood of this kind of flashpoint happening. What was he told?
Well, he asked for the report back in August, and it's important to distinguish between asking for a report about the underlying conditions and the chances of instability and asking for indications that it was about to happen. And this report was in the first category. And so he had Dennis Ross, who's one of his senior Mideast advisors, Samantha Power, and some others, put together a report that dealt with the question of whether or not 4 states in the region, including Egypt, could be susceptible to great unrest because of the youth bulge, the economic downturn, the continued authoritarian steps, and the rise of new technologies that we've seen used in these cases.
Why did the administration keep the report a secret?
Well, at the time that they started the study, they were afraid that if it became known to the Arab states that many of whom were U.S. allies, that this report was being conducted, they'd come under pressure either to stop the work or to suppress the findings. And in fact, the report, which is about 18 pages, is still classified. Now, the administration's begun to talk about some of its conclusions about Egypt. It won't name specifically the other countries that it studied, but they appear to include Bahrain and Yemen and Jordan.
You had CIA Director Leon Panetta acknowledging in testimony before Congress that they needed to better identify these triggers for events like what we saw in Egypt. It made it seem like they didn't, and from what we heard on the intelligence side, like, well, how could we have predicted this? Was there a communication? Was the CIA aware of this report that the president had?
Well, we do know that there were some CIA officials who were part of an interagency task force that put the report together. But identifying the overall conditions and then identifying the triggers is 2 different things. And Director Panetta had an analogy for this the other day. He's from California. He said, you know, we know they're going to be earthquakes. What we don't know is exactly when they're going to come. Now, not a bad sounding analogy, but of course earthquakes are usually triggered by entirely natural causes. These kind of protests are not. And it does raise the question of whether the intelligence community was as tuned into this as the others doing the report.
David, thank you so much for coming on with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Contessa.
All right, so one of the things that you heard the reporter talk about here was the impact of youth, which is demography, and the economic downturn or the economy, and the authoritarian rule, and then finally the impact of changing technology. Now, if we recall our Neo-Marxist triangle here, and I'll put this up on the web page so you can get to it. If we recall that, what they've mentioned there are 3 of the 4 components of the infrastructure in the social cultural system as defined by Neo-Marxism. And that's Sanderson, 1999 is the best accessible discussion of this probably. The economy, ecology, technology, and demography all sit down here at the base of this social cultural system in the infrastructure, with social structure being next, and it containing the one that we're particularly interested in here that was mentioned, which is a political arrangement, and then the superstructure, ideas, religion, art, music, these kind of things, values, and so forth. What was the observation? The observation that Egypt and these other countries were very unstable because of the economic downturn that they had recently experienced, and I believe at least 40% of Egypt's population lives below the poverty level. It turns out that in our country is around 25% or so, depending upon how you calculate them. Demography, Egypt and many of the Middle Eastern countries are just absolutely young countries, and the youth have no attachment to the current social structure, or very little attachment to the current social structure, because they have nothing invested in it except potentially some education, which would be useful in any reasonable social structure that would take hold again. But for middle-class people like myself, or not middle-class, but middle-aged people like myself, you have a big investment because you have a house and cars and things like that, and dramatic changes in the social structure could, the infrastructure could absolutely destroy everything you have. So the demography, the young population, young populations are highly volatile. And then finally technology, the issues of computers, cell phones, Facebook and Twitter, but both of those technologies, along with cell phones and being able to have that information at your disposal, or when you get home and not count on the state-controlled news, they're critical to being able to get the word out and to decide what's going to happen. So those 3 pieces, economy, technology, and demography, were all ripe for producing a social cultural revolution, or a change in the social cultural system, an upheaval in the social cultural system. And you might ask, well, why do changes in the infrastructure produce changes in the whole social cultural system? Because of one of the principles of neo-Marxism and Marxism is infrastructure determinism. Suggests that these things in the infrastructure, economy, ecology, technology, demography, these things all social cultural systems must deal with, and they must have them to survive, and the way they deal with them is by creating social structure and by creating superstructure. And it's those components that they create which amounts to the balance of a social cultural system. So the balance of a social cultural system is created in response to meeting the needs of the infrastructure. Now, when 3 of those components of the infrastructure are ripe for change, it just is a matter of time, as they say in the piece, before that change will take place. And this is infrastructure determinism going up the triangle is absolutely critical component of understanding neo-Marxism. And and things rarely go the other way, except when the infrastructure is weak. And when the infrastructure is weak and ripe for social change, then it's possible for new ideas and music and literature and art and things to come down and change, bring a new infrastructure. But only when this is weak. Otherwise, things go up. Infrastructure determinism. So you can see how this worked out, you know, that this weakness down here, it's going to cause a whole upheaval, a whole change in the infrastructure. Just some other principles that we might want to make sure we cover. Principle of social cultural adaptation, that these things in the social cultural system are developed to meet the needs of the things in the infrastructure. The things in the superstructure are developed to meet the needs of the social structure and the infrastructure. Principle of social cultural adaptation. The principle of conflict, and that there are scarce resources among individuals and groups, and those scarce resources are coveted, and in this case certainly the economic downturn played a large role in highlighting the scarce resources of basic food and the housing and clothing. And with so many young people not having a future, because so many of them are in poverty, and the chances of getting a job after a college degree are very, very small. You can just see how that makes us all ripe for turmoil. And then the last one is the principle, we already talked about the principle of infrastructure determinism, and the last one is the principle of social cultural integration, and that these pieces all fit together, and that they're all connected to one another. Now, was this revolution inevitable? Probably depends upon whether there were changes made up here. It is possible that some changes made up here might delay that revolution, of course, according to Marx and Neo-Marxists, until we get really a socialist system, a system that operates for the needs of the people. Only then will we no longer have this turmoil here, and this turnover that infrastructure will inherently produce. So, yes, it's inherently in the infrastructure. It is possible to band-aid things, and certainly we'll see now how much of a band-aid situation is going to take place, and versus how much of an absolute, complete social cultural revolution is going to take place. So the key component, the key thing to understand here in neo-Marxism is this infrastructure determinism, and Egypt is just a revolution in Egypt in 2011 is just the spring of 2011 is just a classic example of how when these infrastructures change, everything else changes up the triangle in order to meet those needs. But the underlying cause is absolutely crystal clear here with the neo-Marxist understanding of social cultural systems. All right. That's it. Any questions, give me a call, drop me an email. Thanks a lot, and have a pleasant day. Bye-bye.